Early one Sunday afternoon, outside Baltimore, Maryland, a devastating accident occurred that would mark hundreds of lives with tragedy, but inspire many more by bringing out the best in a group of strangers. Most of the footage you will see was taped as the events unfolded on January 4th, 1987. In the small town of Chase, Maryland, trains running through backyards are a fact of life.
You hear the trains all the time, and they're going up and down, and you just never think that anything like this can happen, you know, so close to home.
Some scientists figured out the amount of energy to hit this thing at 100 miles an hour. He said it was like a car going 2,500 miles an hour running into a brick wall.
Baltimore County 911. Yes, ma'am, I just saw a big explosion over by the railroad tracks on Eastern Avenue.
All of a sudden, these calls started coming in. The first couple were reporting an explosion, and we couldn't imagine what could have exploded down that area.
Rescue workers were launched immediately. But in the time it would take them to get to the site, only neighborhood residents who happened to be home would be able to help.
The calls after that were saying that it was a train derailment, and we just figured the worst. And it turned out to be the worst. It really did.
Suddenly there was a big jolt.
Next thing we know, we're just tumbling all over the place, baggage just falling.
It was just people flying all over the place. Just a mess, total mess.
An Amtrak train carrying more than 650 people had slammed into 3 Conrail locomotives that weren't supposed to be there.
There was people like yelling, you know, like help me, like that. So I, ran up to the train. I crawled through the window, and that's when I seen Jim Howard and Catherine Howard. He was, because his must have hit his face against the seat, and his eye was all swelled and everything like that. And she was pretty bad. She couldn't walk at all or anything like that. So we grabbed her, and we handed her out the window. Then we helped him out the window. See, everybody says don't move people to the accident, but then you know that diesel fuel and the fire and everything, you don't know if it's going to blow up or not or anything. So you don't think about it. You think, let's get the people off the train.
One of the first passengers to get out was Jennifer Ginsburg.
The car was tilted on its side, and I remember trying to get my wits together and actually sitting down on a seat for a minute. I was like, oh. And so I sat down, and I heard this voice, excuse me, could you please get up? And there was a man under the seat. You could see that there was a neighborhood, and I saw some people headed that way, so I went that way. And the first house I got to was Nancy's house, and I went to the door, and she was just really open.
We did what we could to make everybody comfortable, give them something to eat, trying to calm them down, because a lot of people just walked around like they were in shock. Nobody would have ever turned anybody down. In all the years I've lived here, most everybody's giving. But I guess we didn't realize how much we had to give till that particular day.
You had to do something, so you would grab people and just lay them down, and people were coming with their blankets and such and covering them up, and you're just trying to stop bleeding as best you could. It was just whatever needed to be done was done.
Minutes after the devastating accident, the first rescue workers began to arrive on the scene. One of the earliest was EMT Dennis Dembeck.
When I arrived at the scene and made our way through the woods up to the actual wreckage, I was pretty overwhelmed by the magnitude of destruction to the train. I've never seen a train derailment of that magnitude before.
Fire Captain Bob Hausman was one of the first to arrive.
The locomotive that was on fire, that was like somebody had taken a box of train parts and sprinkled them all over this. I mean, there was pieces no bigger than 2 or 3 feet. That was a big piece left of this locomotive.
We made entry into the top car. The top car was full of smoke and fire. We moved our way down through the car. It was extremely hot in there at that point in time. A lot of smoke. We couldn't see much of anything, but we could feel people grabbing at our boots, grabbing at our pants, grabbing at our hands. We could hear moaning of individuals.
It was such a jumble that we were trying to connect shoes and legs and feet together to see, who was who. It was just a mess.
As many as 174 people were injured and needed treatment. The local emergency medical system was stretched to its limits.
It was an incident that just overwhelmed you. You couldn't imagine trying to go in and with this large number of casualties trying to do any type of treating. It was a rapid type assessment and moving on.
Gary Warren was one of the EMTs.
We were going ahead and utilizing triage tags, and the triage tags are determining the priority at which we should transport the patients. Medic unit would drive in, pick the patient up, drive out the back, and then be sent to an appropriate hospital.
Dr. James DeOrta helped put the disaster plan into effect at Franklin Square Hospital.
I think we had close to 112 doctors at the hospital within probably 40 minutes. The place was running at max to handle a volume of patients, which we had no idea. We had no idea how many were going to be coming.
Rescue 911 will continue.
911, do you have an emergency?
One of my other crew members called to me knowing I was a paramedic and said, "We have a patient trapped behind the locomotive."
Fireman Walter Ambrose went to look after the 31-year-old man.
Basically, he was alert and oriented. He talked with me. I talked with him. So I told him, I promised him, I says, well, number one, I said, we're here. We're going to take care of you. I will get you out of here. I have never failed to get anybody out before. I've been doing this business for a long time. I will get you out of here. Just trust me, and we'll get it done.
The seriously injured were in the front few cars. The vast majority of passengers had walked away from the accident.
From the first car, which was underneath the top car, we extricated 2 men.
EMT Dembeck had become part of a crew being moved from place to place, wherever people were trapped.
We were taken to another person that was trapped in a bathroom. We couldn't see her, but we heard her voice. And from that point, then we knew that we had to work on an extrication process to get accessibility to her, just to see, if she was hurt. The problem that we had to deal with was a lot of the metal was some metal that we have not had to deal with before as far as using our normal hydraulic rescue tools. We were breaking our jaws of life, our Hearst tool cutters and things of this nature. We were having to go in and have these tools repaired at the scene, as well as pulling more heavy-duty equipment. And so that extrication took us probably at least 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half for the extrication of her.
As neighbor John Kerner watched, the woman trapped in the bathroom was finally pulled out of the wreckage.
I remember this one lady in particular, the way they had the morgue down this side of the track set up and the ambulances on this side. And I remember this one lady, they brought her out and they lowered her down, and you're hoping she goes to the ambulance. And they brought her down and she went to the ambulance. And we almost cheered that, here after all this time, somebody's come out of this alive. Because so many of them were going to the temporary morgue they had set up.
Night was falling, and they still had not managed to free the man pinned behind the locomotive.
Day went on and the hours went on. Fred, I could see that he was getting more frantic. I kept trying to calm him down while I was doing the work. And then at some point, probably 3 hours or so into the operation, and we're working this man, and I've got to know this man for 3 hours, the cars shifted. Because the cars shifted, a decision was made for us to evacuate the premises. We were given orders. I didn't want to do it at the time. To this day, I still don't want to have done it. But we were ordered out. They were afraid that the place was going to collapse, and Fred was left hanging there. It wasn't long then after that Fred expired.
15 others died in the wreck, but more than 650 people survived. The next day, the cleanup began. A year and a half later, the scars are still fresh in the minds of the people who tried to help.
I remember seeing one of the emergency workers pick up somebody's head off the tracks, and he just had him by the hair. And it was just this charred skeleton of his skull. That was all that was left. And at that point, I lost it.
It was sometime later, but it was finally I realized that no matter what I did to help the people that came into the house, there were people that had died that I couldn't help.
Of most of the ones who died, they were alive when we got to them, and we didn't get them out. And for the handful of us that were deeply involved with these people, Amtrak was not a success, it was our failure. And we live with that. We've been living with that failure ever since Amtrak.
Special therapy groups were set up to try to help the rescue workers and neighborhood residents deal with their painful memories.
Talking about an intense emotional experience like that takes the steam out of it. It makes it less overwhelming.
Catherine and Jim Hauer returned to the area for the first time a year and a half after the tragic accident to visit Dan and Michelle Exter, the neighbors who had helped them.
It's real good to see you again. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to be able to say thank you to Michelle and Dan, and we just are really grateful and thankful.
Dan Exter may not think of himself as a hero, and he has to view himself however he wants to. In our minds, he's an absolute hero.
This is Hallie Catherine.
See what you helped us do, Dan?
There isn't a day that goes by that I don't remember the accident. The impact is something that I never want to feel ever again. And I spent my life avoiding that, which is why I won't fly now. I don't ride in the train, and I like to stick as close to ground as possible and go as slow as I can.
Want to go to hell?
I don't know how you can do it. I can't forget when the train hit and how much it hurt.
Life just isn't the same anymore. We're affected in all ways, pretty much. It's just that once you go through a crash of that nature, when you get that close to not being around, you look at life a little differently.
Jennifer Ginsburg also came back to visit Nancy Tharp, the woman who had taken her in after the crash.
I really can't explain it, but I'm really thankful because what it did for me was it made me think about my life and to be glad that I was alive and to make the most of what I have in life.
Knowing that, so many people, their lives were really changed, and it had to happen in our neighborhood. I wouldn't want our neighborhood to be remembered as that's where my son, daughter, wife died. I'd rather be remembered, as for people at least tried to help us.